We all know that adding comments to our code is very important, and comments are something which are encouraged at certain places and they are forced to be added to the code for some certain purposes. Well, that precisely is not true, because a comment can be good in one situation and it can be bad in another. So welcome to our next lecture on software construction and development, and today we are going to discuss how, when and where to use the comments. So let's get started. Well, to keep the thing simple and short as usual, after discussing about comments for some time, we'll be discussing about good and bad comments in this lecture. So nothing can be very helpful and very important as a well placed comment, and that is what we know for sure, because the comments can be very helpful and very informative, and we all know that adding comments is very important. But yes, in contrast, nothing can mess up a module more than a useless and rigid comments. So if a comment that is there is useless or a rigid one, then that is the key player in messing up your module. Well, one very good example for that is a leftover comment that simply is there to propagate you some lies and misinformation, and misinformation is much more dangerous than the information. So it was better if there was a no comment instead of having a comment that is misguiding or misinforming the reader of your code. Well, comments are considered to be a necessary evil, and that is because the necessity of comments cannot be ignored or cannot be neglected, but it is considered that comments would not be required at all, or at least they would be needed at a very lower scale if our languages which we use to program were expressive enough. That means that we could express our intention or the purpose of the code that is being written with the help of the code itself, instead of adding extra comments to explain the working or the purpose of the code. So the proper use of comments is just to compensate for our failure. So that means the comments will only be required when we are failing to write such code which can express itself. So guys, the basic agenda is to use the comments only when they are really needed. Well, we will be discussing some important guidelines and few examples of good and bad comments in this lecture, but it is said that you should make sure that you really need to add a comment in your code before adding it in the code, because the comments too often lie. The older comment, which we have already talked about, can be misinformative to the reader, or it could simply be a wrong or purely lying statement. So the programmers actually cannot realistically maintain the comments, because with the passage of time the code definitely evolves. There are few classes or methods or variables which are being added inside the code, but the comments which are there actually remain there forever, and that is simply because updating and deleting or adjusting the comments as per the changes is very difficult. So in reality what happens that the chunks of code actually move here and there, and the comments which were actually written in the beginning, they keep on staying at their original positions. Well, one example of a leftover comment or unmaintained comment is in front of you, where this comment, the date format, is actually going far away from its original position. Well, originally this comment was supposed to elaborate or explain the date format for the regular expression which is being actually used, but as with the passage of time, new data members were being added in the code and original position of the comment has been changed, and now it just gives an impression that this format or this date actually talks about either one of these variables. So I hope I have made my point by now that the inaccurate comments are far worse than no comments at all. So this is what I have been telling from the beginning, that you should try to avoid the comments, and in worst possible situation, if you are adding them, you should make sure that they are accurate and they are true. So we will see the examples and then we'll have a better idea. Such comment which is inaccurate or which is a leftover misinformative comment can definitely mislead the reader. It could set the wrong expectations, or it can lay down old rules that should not be followed anymore. So for example, the minimum age limit for registration was 18 in the beginning, and then we actually wrote that minimum age limit in the comments. Well, with the passage of time, we revised this rule and we set the minimum age limit to 25, and the developer actually failed to update that date in the comment. Now whenever someone reads that code, with the code we will have an idea that the age limit for registration is still the old one, which is 18 years. Whereas it is said that the truth can only be found in one place, that is the code. Because the comment would be saying that the minimum criteria is 18 years, but the code would definitely be working on the condition or checking the age by comparing it to number 25. So guys, in short, kaha ye jata hai that one of the more common motivations for writing the comment is actually a bad code. So whenever I'm writing the code and I'm feeling guilty from inside, तो मैं चाहूँगा कि मैं उस guilt को ख़त्म करने के लिए और दूसरों को बेहतर समझाने के लिए एक line या multiple lines of comments को add कर सकूँ. But whereas it is said that clear and expressive code with few comments is far superior than the code जो कि बहुत ज़्यादा कॉम्प्लेक्स और मुश्किल है और उसके अंदर बहुत सारे कमेंट्स आपने साथ में ऐड किए हुए हैं. सो द टाइम शुड बी स्पेंट इन क्लीनिंग अ मेसी कोड इंस्टेड ऑफ स्पेंडिंग the same time in writing the comments that explains your mess. It's very important that you sit down and relax and then try to simply clean the code or simplify the logic जो कि आपने डाली है, instead of कि आप उस complex logic में मज़ीद कुछ comments को ऐड करो और उसको मज़ीद बुरी सूरत हाल के अंदर ले जाओ. So the better approach is that you should always try कि you explain yourself in the code. You sit down, relax and try to modify the code as it is. Again, it is less complex and much simple. For example, there is a possibility that you might need to extract some functions. हो सकता है कि आपको छोटे छोटे functions बनाकर और उनको एक बड़े या लार्जर फंक्शन के अंदर से कॉल करना हो, और सिर्फ ये करने से ये एक्स्ट्रा फंक्शंस क्रिएट करने से, बाय स्पेंडिंग सम टाइम, एक्स्ट्रा टाइम ऑन क्रिएटिंग दोज फंक्शंस, यू माइट नॉट नीड टू राइट इवन अ सिंगल लाइन ऑफ द कमेंट इन योर कोड. वेल, एक छोटा फंक्शन ऐड करने की बहुत अच्छी एग्जांपल इज इन फ्रंट ऑफ यू, वेयर आई एम हैविंग अ मेथड. In fact, in the second approach, I'm simply calling a method which says employee.is eligible for full benefits. Well, by simply reading this line, I understand that this method is actually checking if the employee, the current employee on which I'm calling the method, is eligible for full benefits. In contrast, well, a poor approach is in front of you with the comments added, and even then I'm unable to understand what's happening in this line of code. Well, the comment explains that we are trying to check to see if the employee is eligible for full benefits, and then उसके बाद कुछ criteria है, कुछ comparisons हैं, कुछ composite conditions जो हैं मैं लगा रहा हूँ, और उसके बाद I'll be doing the same thing. So instead, the right or better approach is जहाँ पर I can simply extract this method into extract this code into a method and simply call that method from my code. Well, by now you would be very much demotivated and thinking that you should be regretting all the comments you have been writing since long, but the answer is that out of all those comments, there could be the comments which are actually required, which are really necessary. So to justify the comments that you were writing, in fact justify some of the comments that you have been writing since long, let's have a look at the good comments. Well, some of the comments, they are really necessary and they are beneficial instead of being the evil. But one tip if I would be giving you to see if the comment that you're writing is a good comment is a good comment is the comment which basically you found no way to write. Basically that is very difficult to write, and you take a lot of time in deciding that what comment should I be adding here. Well, that is the comment which is a good comment, and you should again think and think again and then add that comment. Well, just to name a few, we have compiled a list of good comments where there are few types or possible types of good comments, including few names which we'll be discussing one by one in the coming part. So the very first type is legal comments. सो जी लीगल कमेंट्स वो होते हैं जो कि आपकी कॉपीराइट या ऑथरशिप स्टेटमेंट्स को रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे होते हैं. सो एन एग्जांपल इज हियर इन फ्रंट ऑफ यू. बट इस तरह के जो कमेंट्स हैं उनके लिए एक बहुत ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट गाइडलाइन ये है कि जो भी आपकी डिटेल्ड टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस होंगी दे आर नॉट सपोज टू बी इन दिस टाइप ऑफ कमेंट्स, बल्कि इनके लिए ज़रूरी ये है कि आप उनका कोई लिंक, एक्सटर्नल डॉक्यूमेंट का लिंक या किसी साइट का लिंक जो है वो अपने कमेंट में सिर्फ मेंशन कर देते हो, और उसके बाद उसकी जो डिटेल्स हैं अगर किसी को पढ़नी है तो वहाँ जाकर पढ़ सकता है. सो लीगल कमेंट्स आर वन टाइप ऑफ कमेंट्स which should be there, which are necessary and they could be beneficial at times. अच्छा, देन कुछ कमेंट्स ऐसे होते हैं जो कि आपको कुछ बुनियादी इन्फॉर्मेशन जो है वो दे रहे होते हैं. अब बेसिक इन्फॉर्मेशन इज बीइंग गिवन टू द रीडर ऑफ द कोड. वेल दोज कमेंट्स could be considered as good comments. An example is here in front of you where इस फंक्शन की जो बेसिकली जो रिटर्न वैल्यू है उसको एक्सप्लेन किया जा रहा है, नॉट द रिटर्न टाइप, रादर द रिटर्न वैल्यू. सो ये this function is returning an object of the responder which is being tested. So it is the responder जिसको हम टेस्ट कर रहे हैं. वेल कहा ये जाता है कि ठीक है, this is a good example or a perfect or a good situation for adding a comment, but still we can avoid writing this type of comment by simply renaming our function to a better name. So instead of saying responder instance, जहाँ पे हम बताना चाह रहे हैं कि responder instance वो वाला जो कि टेस्ट किया जा रहा है, तो I can say it like responder being tested, which tells more information, and by this name I will not need to add this comment anymore in my code. बट अगेन इन्फॉर्मेटिव कमेंट्स जो हैं जहाँ पे हम बुनियादी इन्फॉर्मेशन दे रहे होते हैं, दे कुड बी वेरी यूजफुल इन सिचुएशंस लाइक दिस. यहाँ पर मैं एक रेगुलर एक्सप्रेशन यूज़ कर रहा हूँ और उसके एक्चुअल फॉर्मेट को समझाने के लिए आई रियली हैव टू ऐड द कमेंट हियर, और इसका कोई और तरीका नहीं है. इसमें कोड जो है वो खुद को सेल्फ एक्सप्लेन नहीं कर सकता. सो आई एम एडिंग अ कमेंट हियर एंड दिस टाइप ऑफ कमेंट इज कंसिडर्ड टू एज इन्फॉर्मेटिव कमेंट, इनफैक्ट अ गुड कमेंट. समटाइम्स हम अपने कोड के अंदर बहुत सी डिसीजंस ले रहे होते हैं या एक लॉजिक जो है वो बना रहे होते हैं विच रियली कैन नॉट बी अंडरस्टूड बाय सिंपली रीडिंग द कोड, बल्कि उसके पीछे जो नीयत या इंटेंट है वी नीड टू एक्सप्लेन दैट. वेल, फॉर एक्सप्लेनेशन ऑफ दैट इंटेंट वी कैन राइट और ऐड अ कमेंट, बट रिमेंबर दिस इंटेंट इज नॉट द इंटेंट ऑफ द मेथड बट इंटेंट ऑफ अ पर्टिकुलर डिसीजन. सो इंटेंट ऑफ अ मेथड शुड बी explained or understood by the name of the method itself. Well, a good example for delivering or showing an intent with the help of a comment is here. So I'm returning a particular value, say for example 1 here. Well, to explain what do I mean by this value is written in this comment. अच्छा, वन टाइप ऑफ कमेंट इज़ कॉल्ड अ क्लैरिफिकेशन कमेंट, जहाँ पे हम अपने किसी फॉर एग्जांपल कॉल्ड मेथड की कंपैरिजन को या रिटर्न वैल्यू को क्लैरिफाई कर रहे होते हैं और रीडर को एक्सप्लेन करना चाह रहे होते हैं कि व्हाट डू आई मीन बाय दिस वैल्यू 0 हियर, व्हाई आई एम कंपेयरिंग द रिटर्न value of this method call with 0, and what will it mean if it is equal to 0. So I can add a lot of comments like for the compare to method, जिसकी बहुत सी possibilities हो सकती हैं. उन possibilities को explain करने के लिए I can have a lot of comments, and उन comments को की मदद से I can provide or give some clarification to the reader of the code. वेल क्लैरिफिकेशन कमेंट्स के लिए एक चीज़ जो बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी होती है और बहुत ज़्यादा रिस्की भी कहलाती है कि इफ़ योर क्लैरिफिकेशन इज़ रॉन्ग देन डेफिनेटली दैट इज़ गोइंग टू मिस इन्फॉर्म और मिसगाइड द रीडर ऑफ द कोड. So you should definitely take care that the clarifications that you're providing or the any comment anywhere that you're writing must be accurate. Well, the purpose of some of the comments is to warn the reader or the user of the code from the consequences of executing or calling a particular function or a particular piece of code. Well, for example, I'm creating a code or writing a method which takes a longer time to execute, so I can warn the reader. Well, that's a very casual way to warn, but a very good and formal example of that could be this piece of code where we are warning the reader, in fact user of the method, to simply create separate instances for the simple date format class, because this class is not thread safe. So whenever we are passing that instance to different methods, it is very important to create separate objects for that method so that our program may not crash at the runtime. So, well, there could be some other technical scenarios and situations where you really need or want to warn the reader of the in fact, the user of the code for the consequences that may occur. One very common situation, another common situation of adding a comment is a to-do situation. Well, this is a situation where we want the future users of our code to add further details because those details were not available in the past. यानी मौजूदा वक्त में हम उस कोड को ऐड नहीं कर सकते. प्रॉब्ली हमारा डेटाबेस तैयार नहीं था, कोई डेटाबेस का जो टेबल है वो इस वक्त क्रिएट नहीं हुआ था, तो हम उस टेबल पे क्यूरी करना चाह रहे हैं, बट वी कैन नॉट डू दैट राइट नाउ बिकॉज टेबल एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता. सो वी कैन लीव इट टू द फ्यूचर यूजर्स ऑफ द कोड कि वो यहाँ पर उस क्यूरी को उस टाइम के अंदर ऐड कर सकें. तो इस तरह की बहुत सी एग्जांपल्स जो हैं हमारे पास फ्रेमवर्क्स की सूरत में होती हैं, जहाँ पर फ्रेमवर्क्स के अंदर कुछ टेम्पलेट मेथड्स दे दिए जाते हैं और उन मेथड्स को फिल करना होता है हमने अपनी ज़रूरत के मुताबिक. सो टू डू कमेंट्स इज़ अ वेरी गुड एग्जांपल एंड इसकी ज़रूरत पड़ती है हमें, जो कि बहुत ज़्यादा फ़ायदेमंद हो सकता है. Amplification is another scenario. So by amplification we mean we need to highlight or amplify the importance of something that may otherwise seem inconsequential. So for example, I'm calling a trim method here. Well, it seems कि string के ऊपर कोई string value ले रहा हूँ मैं और simply उसको string variable में save कर रहा था. बट एडिंग अ ट्रिम कॉल हेयर, उसका बेसिक पर्पस क्या है, उसको यहाँ से हम ख़त्म क्यों नहीं कर सकते, वो उसको हाईलाइट करने के लिए आई कैन सिंपली ऐड अ कमेंट हेयर. एंड फाइनली जी, एक बहुत ज़्यादा ऑफिशियल यूज़ जो कमेंट्स का हमने देखा है दैट इज़ इन दी जावा डॉक्स. एंड इसके अलावा कुछ पब्लिक एपीआईज, जैसा कि लेट्स सपोज यू गो इनटू एंड वर्क विद इजी पैसा और जाज कैश एपीआईज और एनी अदर एपीआईज दैट यू थिंक ऑफ, तो आपको उनके अंदर जो कमेंट्स हैं वो बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी हैं, उनकी ज़रूरत पड़ती है, महसूस होती है. सो इसी तरह से जो जेडीके की बहुत सी क्लासेस एंड मेथड्स आप यूज़ करते हो, तो वो जावा डॉक्यूमेंटेशन, जावा डॉक्स आपको उसके अंदर भी नज़र आ रहे होते हैं. सो दैट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज द यूज़र्स ऑफ योर एपीआई माइट नॉट नो एग्जैक्टली कि उस मेथड का क्या मकसद है, उसकी रिटर्न टाइप, उसकी पैरामीटर्स कब किस तरह किन सिचुएशंस एंड सिनेरियोज में इस्तेमाल किए जा सकते हैं. सो वेल, दिस इज़ वन अदर गुड एग्जांपल ऑफ गुड कमेंट्स. So guys, this concludes our selective list of possible types of good comments, and with this we will stop here at this point, and we will continue discussing about the bad comments in the second part of this lecture. So thank you.